Welcome to The Actual Story, the official podcast of the National Agricultural Communicators of Tomorrow. I'm your host, Lydia Hill, and I, along with the rest of the National Officer team, are here to share the voices, ideas, and stories shaping the future of agriculture and communications. Whether you're a student, professional, or simply passionate about the industry, this is your place to connect, learn, and be inspired. So without further ado, let's dive into today's actual story. On today's episode of The Actual Story, we are honored to have Macey Igo. Like most women, Macey wears many hats. At her day job, she wears the hat of a print consultant and saleswoman for the Modern Litho print company. At nights and on the weekends, you can find her in Shorty's cowboy hat. As she communicates ag, speaking to producers and consumers, sharing agricultural truths on social media, or writing for various industry publications. When she's not in work mode, she's probably sporting a free cap she picked up at a trade show while she's working outside or spending time on the water. She's been featured on shows like RFD TV, Market Day Report, and Farm Her or Ranch Her, and published in numerous agricultural publications. She and her husband Luke now reside in central Missouri, where they are growing their faith, family, and herd. So, welcome, Macey, and also joining us today is Wyatt Morrow, our National ACT Vice President. So excited to have you guys on today. Macey, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. I've been blessed to get to meet you both at certain conferences over the last year or two. So excited to be talking with you today. Like you said, my name's Macey. I'm from just outside of Jefferson City, Missouri. My husband and I just bought a farm just a few miles west of there. So settle into that. And then grew up on a cow-calf operation in a little bitty tiny town in central Missouri. Went to college at Missouri State University. I got degrees in agricultural communications and ag business marketing and sales, and then a minor in Spanish. And while I was in high school going into college, my parents actually split up and the farm was liquidated. And that's where a big part of my story comes from is Lady Livestock Company, which my mom and my sister and I started. And that was kind of our big venture into the ag industry for several years. And recently closed that chapter, but have been excited to get to use that time and energy in a lot of other ways to advocate for the agriculture industry, for women in agriculture, and get to speak at some events all across the country. And then my day job is at Modern Litho. I'm an account executive, so I work with lots of publications and different businesses within the agriculture industry on their print solutions. And then outside of the agriculture industry as well. And then I do a lot of freelance, whether that's marketing, writing, magazine layout, really just different types of communication work for predominantly agriculture groups, but a few outside of the ag industry too. So I'm pretty lucky that I get to keep, I feel like, my hands in lots of different ag sectors because of really my communications experience and what being a part of things like National ACT did for me in college.
Yeah, I love that. So I know you wear a lot of different hats. That's what your bio says, and that is so, so true. But I know you said you got a minor in Spanish. What was your reasoning behind that?
So I studied Spanish for a couple years in high school, and I am from a town of 200 people. My high school had about an hour radius of kids that fed into it. And so small school, super rural, absolutely no diversity, which is fine. But I loved learning that the Spanish part of it, even though like my teacher was from, that town, and it was kind of interesting just because nobody in the class even really had any real world experience speaking Spanish. But the summer before I went to college, I was sitting at a nail salon, and there's probably like 12 or 13 people in the salon. And I was one of like maybe 3 people that spoke predominantly English, and there were several other languages in the salon. And so I was like, man, this is just something that I feel like in a world of so much diversity is something that I want to be able to have to communicate with people who maybe have different backgrounds than I do, or, especially in agriculture, and whether that's trade or labor force or whatever that looks like, there's so much diversity. And so I just wanted to be able to really communicate with those people. And I will say, since moving back home, haven't used it as much as I expected, but I learned so much just about culture and travel and all of those things while studying it in college that I have no regrets about taking that time and putting the effort into that.
Yeah, I think that's really intriguing and different because not a lot of people, like simply in ag communications, think about Spanish besides just taking what's required for college. I mean, I hated Spanish class. I can say that very confidently. But as communicators, we need to be able to talk to people that don't just speak English, and we have to share a message with everybody. So I think that's really cool that you did that. Wyatt, feel free to jump in anytime with questions, comments, things like that.
Yeah, I do think it's really interesting that you also took like a different language route. In high school, the only class that was really offered there for me was Spanish, and I didn't really take the traditional route that a lot of my classmates were taking. So they offered American Sign Language for a few of us, so I was able to become partially fluent in that. I still do a little here and there, but it is very interesting still being able to communicate in different ways more than just English. So I really understand your perspective in that.
Yeah, I think too, the sign language thing is something I wish that I would have put more time and effort into because I think that's another one that I would just love to be able to communicate with those individuals. And even honestly, like, so my husband and I are expecting our first baby, and even learning about how babies communicate and like
Hmm.
how much sign language they use, and how it's wild to me how important communication is with all different types of people, young and old, regardless of their backgrounds or ethnicities or whatever. And I think that people in that position, like learning Spanish, they always said if you go to a Spanish speaking country and you attempt to speak Spanish and it's super broken and they can barely tell what you're saying, they're still going to be so excited that you took the time to even learn that much to be able to communicate with them and to, come to their country and share that with them. Or, if they're here and you're taking that initiative to say, hey, I want to be able to communicate with you. I think that goes so far for so many.
Yeah, most definitely. Congratulations, by the way. I know you and your husband are probably really excited. So uh, keep posting on social media because we want to keep up with you and your journey.
Thanks.
So I know you mentioned freelance. I kind of want to know a little bit about like how you first got started, like how you landed your first client. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is something I love talking about because I feel like it's one of those things where it's so simple that I think if people really truly knew how easy it was to get started, more people would do it. So when I was in high school, I think I was a sophomore or junior, my whole world revolved around FFA, and the local newspaper reached out and said, hey, would you write an article just about kind of what the FFA is about? So I did that and I kind of loved it. I didn't really expect to like feel that good to be published. And at the time, I was doing a lot of public speaking contests anyway, and I loved the storytelling side of things. I loved, weaving my own personal experiences into sharing the story of agriculture. And so that kind of gave me the background where I felt confident in the actual writing portion. But then, of course, writing for a speaking contest is so different than writing for a cattleman's magazine or whatever that looks like. So we were actually at CattleCon. I think I was a freshman or sophomore in college, and I went to school, like I said, in Missouri State University, which is not very far from Joplin Regional Stockyards, which I believe is now the largest um, cattle market in the country. So we stopped by their booth, said hi, thanks for supporting us as a collegiate cattlemen's group. And they have their own publication. And I just said, hey, I'm trying to get into writing. I'd really love to write for your publication. Are you guys looking for anybody? And a guy named Mark gave me his card and he said, send me an email when you get back home. And I have been writing for them on a monthly basis ever since. And it was just that simple. I just said, hey, I want to write for you. And I've had so many conversations with publishers from other magazines that, I now write for a local sports magazine. I write for, some more regional cattlemen's ones. And it's truly just as simple as an email saying, hey, this is my experience. I'm really interested in writing for you. Can we have a conversation about it? A lot of publishers, even like if you come to them with a pitch, maybe an article you've already written that hasn't been published somewhere else, and you say, hey, this is an important topic to me. I think your readers would really get something out of it. There's so many different ways to go about it, but it's just as simple as an ask. And my mom's best friend always tells us. She's gotten us into so many situations because of this, mostly good, but she always says, what's the worst that can happen? They say no. So, and it's really that simple. And in a lot of ways too, a no isn't a firm no. It's we're not looking for anybody right now, but maybe, they have somebody that has to step away, and then they have this opening and they think, oh, what about that girl we met at CattleCon last year? So there's always opportunities, I think, just to have those conversations, or, maybe they're not looking for somebody, but they have a publisher friend that is looking for somebody. So just being, having that little bit of courage to just go up and say, hey, I may be new to this, but I'm really passionate about it, and I want to start. I'd love to start with you and see where that conversation goes.
For sure. What advice would you give to someone who maybe isn't as confident in just walking up and asking somebody if they have a position open? What advice would you give someone who's struggling with a little bit of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And a lot of times you don't get the opportunity to do that in person. So, and I will say another piece of advice I would have for whether it's a college student or a recent grad is to try to put yourself in the position to have those conversations. So whether it's Ag Media Summit or CattleCon or Professional Development Conference or whatever that is, get face to face with those people. And even if you don't have the courage to say, or, you're not comfortable in that moment with kind of making the ask, make that connection, and then you can always shoot them a LinkedIn message or send them an email and say, hey, it was great to meet you at Ag Media Summit. I would love to connect. Would you be willing to tell me more about your publication? Or would you be willing to read some samples of stuff I've written? I'd really be interested in writing for you. And just making those connections that, they say a lot, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And with the ag industry being so small, I think that's not it's not the only thing you need, right, is connections, but boy, they go so far. And being able to have someone vouch for you, whether it's someone you worked for an internship, or a professor, or someone you just ran into at a conference that said, hey, I had a conversation with that young professional and they seemed really, really, capable. Those comments and those connections will go really far for whether it's a freelancer or someone looking for a full-time position or whatever that looks like.
Yeah, I feel like as students, like even when I was back in high school, my FFA advisor would just be like, take every opportunity and make every connection. And I really didn't understand it until like those connections started working in my favor. And I've carried that into college. And as students, we hear that so much as like network and meet connections. And you don't really find out how beneficial it is until you actually do it. Go ahead, Wyatt.
Did you ever have I've had like friends talk about like experiencing this. Did you ever find a connection or network with someone you were like, wow, this is really going to change the trajectory of what I might be able to do?
Yes, but I didn't know it in the moment, if that makes any sense.
Hmm.
So, for example, I have been a part of Missouri Cattlemen's for as long as I can remember. My family has been in the cattle industry for as long as I can remember, and I always remember like really looking up to the staff of that and thinking, man, I would love to do that someday. But it honestly like never seemed like I felt like I was working toward it, but I was kind of far from it. And then they had a position open up, which wasn't super public. And they reached out and they said, like, hey, we'd be interested in you coming to work to fill this position. And that was one of those things where looking back, it was just like, I was just a member, just like anyone else, but I had competed in contests. I'd run for their beef queen. I'd done all these things that kept me connected to those people. And even though I don't work there anymore, like I'm still so connected with those individuals because of the relationships that I built with the members and the staff prior to working there, which I'm sure had huge influence on me being able to work there. And then also beyond, where, a lot of times now we'll run into each other at events, or if I need a source for an article I'm writing for a cattleman's publication, I have this huge database of ranchers from the Midwest that are always happy to share with me. So I think that's just one of many, many examples that, have really benefited me in my career. Another example kind of tied to that, when I ran for Beef Queen, one of the ladies on the panel that selected me for Beef Queen was my first boss out of college. And so it's just, it's one of those things where like in agriculture, again, you're going to see these people everywhere. And that's what they used to tell us in FFA was like the people that you're sitting next to at these contests, the people that you're, in workshops with at National FFA Convention, the people you're competing against, they're going to be your coworkers. They're going to be potentially like your bosses or your employees. They're going to be these people that you see everywhere you go for the rest of your career in agriculture. So it's really important that you take the time to connect with those people to, make meaningful relationships. That's something I think is really important, that, they say like a relationship is a bank and you have to deposit before you can withdraw, right? So making sure that you're putting time into learning who that person is and what's important to them before you start asking for things in return. Because again, you're going to see those people at every single conference you go to, at all of these different events, and they're going to be the same individuals over and over again. And I think that's really cool. I also think it's cool that in agriculture, there's so many people who weren't raised in it that are very eager to get into it. And so I think it's important too that those of us who maybe were born and raised into it are welcoming them with open arms, without judgment, because so many times their stories, I feel like, have more impact on consumers because they don't come into it with that experience. Whereas like for me, when I talk to consumers, I have to be really careful about not being defensive because this is my family's way of life, right? So for them, I feel like they've almost got an advantage. So anyway, not to keep rambling on that, but the relationships that you make, whether it's in high school, college, in your career, they're going to really carry you through.
Yeah, I completely agree. Connections is like the backbone of wherever you end up in life, whether you stay in agriculture or not. Kind of circling back to the freelance topic, I know a lot of us college students that are interested in writing, we do not know how to start pricing. So can you kind of walk us through that process and give us some tips?
So that is a really hard question. And honestly, it's probably the one I get most commonly. And it's so gosh darn tricky because I write for publications that are capped out at $50 an article. I write for publications that pay certain writers $4.50 an article. And they're very similar, like reaches and content and stuff like that. And so I think it's really a trial and error thing. It's sometimes it's just an honest conversation with the publisher, whoever you're talking to about writing. Sometimes it's, if you're just getting into it, you have to maybe say, well, I'd like to be making more than this one day, but this is where I'm going to start. And then if your business really starts to pick up, okay, that's a competitive rate. Maybe you can raise your rates. But I think the thing you don't want to do is outprice yourself from the get-go and then get the reputation of being unattainable, right? So that's a really, really tricky one. And I think it does depend a lot on your experience, on the type of freelance you're doing. Like I know some graphic designers charge $45 an hour. I know some who charge like $100 an hour. And so figuring out what your service is, what your time is worth, I think that's a really important one too. So, maybe you have a lot of extra time and, you can say, well, I'll start at $45 an hour, but then maybe you get other contracts that are worth more. And then they either need to like match that rate, or maybe you need to say, hey, I'm at capacity. This one's going to have to fall off for now. So there's a lot of different factors to consider. And there may be other freelancers listening to this saying that's terrible advice, but that would be my advice, is to kind of figure it out as you go. Depending on your time, your capacity, your experience, and whether or not you're really trying to build a business. If you want to say you want to do freelance full time, well, you're going to have to be pretty competitive. Whereas like for me, it's something I do on the weekends, right? So there's a lot of things that go into it, and I really wish there was an answer like, $50 an hour, you're set. But unfortunately, it's not that easy.
Yeah, that's like my biggest struggle, as like I've toyed with it and I've really considered it. But I'll talk to someone and they're like, "Oh, well, we charge per article, and the next person charges like per word, and the next person charges per hour." And so I guess it really is like what works best for you starting out.
Yeah, and a lot of times I'll let people, like the hiring individual, kind of start that conversation, because some of them do have pretty flat rates. Like they pay every single one of their writers the same exact price for every article. So in that case, like they're going to tell you, and it's not going to be negotiable. I would always recommend trying to negotiate, but sometimes it just kind of is what it is. And then other times, you can present something and it gets tricky because, again, say they pay $350 an article and you say, well, I charge $500 an article. They're going to say, sorry, that's out of our price range. But if you say, I charge $150 an article, they're going to say, great, when can you start? So I think, again, it's just kind of a conversation. And if you can let them start that conversation, I think that will kind of save you the stress in the long run. But if they do say $150, you can always say, hey, I usually charge $300, but I'm willing to negotiate, see where the conversation goes from there. But yeah, it's a tricky conversation to have.
For sure. Staying on the subject of writing and everything, I know you've been doing this a while, and there probably have been some trend changes since you began writing. So, what habits or practices, I guess I could say, help you stay sharp in that role of you either freelancing or you doing it at work?
That's a really good question. I think so. When I first started writing, it was exclusively magazines. And more recently, I've been doing things like weekly e-newsletters and blog posts and a lot of technical stuff as far as, like I used to, when I kind of started, it was a lot of feature writing, and then it went to why you should test your hay kind of stuff. So I think being able to be versatile, I guess, in those different formats and also topics, I think are important. And I think in communications, we have such an advantage already because our skills are so applicable to so many different places. And so I think being able to really, maybe you hone in on, okay, I'm not a graphic designer, I'm a writer. And you figure out that portion. But if you're a writer, I think being able to write a blog or write a feature piece or write a newsletter, I think those are, I think that makes you marketable. And then, of course, just being the best at what you do, right? So just continuing to, I think reading is a really great way to increase your writing skills. ChatGPT. Let's talk about it. So I know it's pretty controversial, especially in communications. But honestly, I started using ChatGPT because of one of my clients who said, we're going to send you articles that other people have written, and we want summaries so that we can get people's attention and send them to those articles, right? And they said, type it in ChatGPT. ChatGPT is going to write all these. Which I was like, great, easiest job ever, right? And I learned a lot, I feel like, about writing from comparing ChatGPT's writing style to mine. Granted, I'm not going to rely on ChatGPT to write all my articles from here on out, right? But sometimes I'll get a sentence and I'll just write it and rewrite it and write it again. And it's just too crowded, right? And I can put it in ChatGPT and say, what am I doing wrong here? And so I kind of use it as a resource to learn and to hold myself, I guess, I don't know if accountable is the right word, but to make sure that I'm doing the best I can do as a writer to make sure that my words are making sense. So I do like ChatGPT in that sense. Now, am I going to say, hey, I have to write an article about this farmer from mid-Missouri. This is his information. Spit it out. I'm not going to do that, right? I feel like that takes away all the credibility of a writer, but I don't think there's anything wrong with using it to kind of challenge yourself and to catch yourself when maybe you're going in a direction that you wouldn't want to go in. So that would probably be my advice. Like I said, reading. I think reading does a lot of good. I should do it more often, but I even listen to audiobooks, but I just think exposing yourself to different writers' styles can help create new ideas and kind of inspire different approaches, which, again, if you're writing technical pieces, I think sometimes it can be well, that's not really applicable to me. But at the same time, if you're writing technical pieces, you might have to be a little more creative to get people's attention, because it's not always fun to read about, free Martin calves or whatever. So, that would probably be my advice, is just making sure that you can do your job, do it well, and then be an asset in different different places of communications as well.
So you talked a lot about how like reading can be helpful. Is there any writers that inspired you and maybe helped kind of construct your personal writing style?
That's a good question, and I wish I had a good answer. But honestly, I was always a reader. When I was a kid, I read all the time. And I think that in itself, there wasn't any particular writer. I was reading like fiction, nonfiction, like anything I could find at the library kind of thing. Like I got Barnes and Noble gift cards every year for Christmas because that's all I ever did was read. So I think just, like I said, exposing myself to the variety of writers is what really helped me kind of love the art of writing, but then also develop my own style. There's a lot of really great writers in agriculture. I've got a lot of friends through Livestock Publications Council and the Ag Communicators Network and stuff. There's so many of them on there that I'm friends with in real life, but also like on LinkedIn, and they share their stuff. And it's really interesting to see all their different styles and then how they do get to kind of use their creativity to make like mental health a topic that obviously is important, but making people want to read about that, I think, is the important part of being a writer. So, um, yeah, I don't know that I can name one off the top of my head. A lot of people, and it always impresses me when somebody asks that question and they're like, yeah, I'll tell you exactly who inspired me to be a writer. But for me, it was just all of the different ones and everything I read up to being a writer. And then again, while I've been a writer, that have helped me kind of evolve my style.
Mhm. Do you by chance have a favorite topic to write about? Like maybe different types of agricultural issues? Maybe is it just interviewing farmers and ranchers?
That's a good question too. So I did mention mental health. That's probably my favorite thing to write about, just because I think I'm not really a numbers person. I'm very much like like when I was in college, the professor would always say, "Why are we in communications?" And everybody would say, "Because we're bad at math." And that is true for me. So, which I'm in sales now, so a lot of numbers. But I think the numbers behind mental health have a really big impact. Whenever you share, like the last article I wrote, it was 123 people a day in the United States lose their lives to suicide. And so hearing things like that and being able to kind of put that issue into perspective for readers, and in agriculture, that's a huge issue, right? So farmers and ranchers are dying because of mental health issues faster than any other occupation. Things like that, I think, are topics that people need to read about. So I'm really passionate about writing about that, and then I do a lot of speaking on that topic too. So that, I would say, that's probably my favorite topic to write about. But I also love doing feature stories, whether that's multi-generational farms and ranches or women in agriculture or whatever it looks like. I don't get to do those quite as often. A lot of my stuff is more technical, but I always think it's neat whenever you can share the humans behind agriculture. And I think that resonates a lot with the consumers on the other side, who often get told that, we're just factories pumping out their food, when in fact there's a lot of families and people behind it that are really passionate about creating a healthy, happy product for the consumer on the other side.
Yeah, kind of backing off of the whole feature story thing, I think it makes agriculture emotional. So, like you said, a lot of consumers do think that agriculture is just like made in a lab or a factory, and that's how they get their food. But being able to write like a family or just a singular producer's story really does like draw that emotion out in the consumer or fellow producer. And it gives you a lot of insight onto what farmers go through every single day.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was back in my FFA camp days, maybe, but they always talked about this concept that consumers approach agriculture with either an economical, an environmental, or an emotional standpoint. So for those individuals who are saying, why are we growing all that corn and feeding it to cattle when we could be feeding it to humans? That's probably like an economical concern, or methane emissions effect the on the planet. That's an environmental issue. But so often it's things like, how do I know this is safe to put on my son or daughter's plate? How do I know that this isn't going to cause some disease in my body? Things like that are very emotional, I think, are in my experience, the most common arguments, or even, is this humane? Why do we have to kill animals to eat? Things like that. So, like you said, making our side of things a little more, showing the emotion of our side of things, I do think helps those individuals realize that we're not out to get them. We're not out to hurt animals. In fact, quite the opposite. We want to make sure the animals are taken care of just as well as the consumers are taken care of.
Yeah. On that topic, have you had to write about anything controversial, or was there a specific project that you had where it was really tough on you to write about? I guess I know we know your favorite topics to write about, but what are the ones that are more difficult for a writer to talk about?
So this came to the top of my head because somebody on my LinkedIn the other day was talking about hate mail, and I've only gotten one piece of hate mail in my writing career, and it was back when I was at Missouri Cattlemen's Association. We had a weekly newsletter called Prime Cuts, and it was around the election in what would have been 2016. Yeah, sorry, I had to look at the calendar to see what year it was. So the election had just happened, right? But there was all kinds of controversy about whether or not the election was legitimate or whatever. I have no comment on any of that. But I, in the newsletter, wrote about the administration changes that were expected under President-elect Joe Biden, because he was the president-elect, right? So by editorial standards, I referred to him as President-elect Joe Biden. And the message I got in regards to me referring to him as the president-elect was wild to me to come from just a grown man. And so it's interesting to me, and, not to get too deep, but in the world we live in today, it's, I think, hard to express any opinion, political, religious, or whatever, and not get some type of negative feedback about it. And so I think that is probably tricky for, I imagine, anybody who has to do that. I just did it for a short period of time. I don't have to do a lot of that anymore. But I really commend those individuals who have to go really deep into the weeds on those things, because people can be really mean about things that it's just not necessary to be that mean about, right? So, yeah, I hope that just kind of in a general sense that people realize that while these topics are probably very, very serious, it's not worth being hateful about.
Most definitely, especially with those harder topics, policy, religion, environmental concerns. And it's even harder to talk about it, I feel in agriculture itself, because a lot of people already have misconceptions in their head. And then you're adding on the topics like policy, religion, and environment, adding that into the hard agricultural conversations. It's really hard to be able to put yourself in that consumer's shoes and not get emotional about it.
Yeah, it's tough too, because like you said, there's the consumers, and for so long there's been this idea of farmers and ranchers versus consumers, which again is unnecessary, because at the end of the day we're on the same team, right? We all want healthy food, healthy earth, we all want those things. But there's also been, and I feel like it's becoming more and more common, of these farmers and ranchers against each other, right? There's so many different organizations for the same exact thing just because we can't agree. And that's, I think, not agreeing is fine, right? That's how progress happens. We have these tough conversations and we come out better because of it. But man, it's frustrating to see farmers and ranchers go after each other just because they do things differently or because they believe something different. And I think that is probably more detrimental to the ag industry than anything else, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Because if agriculture can't stand as a united front against consumers, why should the consumers believe anything we have to say?
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
I kind of want to switch a little bit. You are very busy. You said you write for freelance on the weekends, but how are you able to balance your personal life, your ranch life, relationships with all that you do for your career?
So this is a hard lesson that I had to learn because for a very long time I had no balance and it made me crazy. Like it was a very, very tough time on my physical health, on my mental health, and I had no relationships. Like even I didn't even spend time with my family and friends, right? So um, it's been kind of a something else I had to figure out by trial and error. And the thing that I probably learned from that was that it's okay if your dreams change. So, like in college, my entire goal was to get out as fast as I could and get the best job I could immediately, right? So I was taking 24 credit hours a semester. I was working at an insurance office in the afternoons. Then I was going home and freelancing at nights, and then I was going home every weekend to be on the ranch. So like I had no life outside of school and work. And I look back on that and yeah, did I get done early? Yeah. Did I get a job pretty quick out of school? Yeah. Did I have any fun? Not really. Like I made some friends, but I didn't spend any time with them. And so that, learning those lessons kind of as I went. And then at one point in my last position, I was just so overwhelmed. Like I'd been traveling a lot, which is something I desperately wanted to do in my career, was be able to travel. But then it started to pile on to my day job and my freelance and again, my relationships. And at the time I was having some physical health issues and all of that together was taking a toll on my mental health. And it just got to a point to where I knew something had to change. So I ended up switching careers. I stopped traveling as much as I had been. And I realized that maybe that's not what I wanted for that stage in my life. And now being in the position I am in, knowing that, in a few months, there's going to be a baby and I may not have time to do freelancing every night and on the weekends. So I've closed out some of my contracts and I don't travel at all anymore. I'm married, we have a farm, all of these things. Like, I don't want to travel that much anymore. And so looking back, and I imagine having this conversation with 19-year-old Macey, she would be like, that is not what you planned. And it's true. But back then my priority was a career and traveling and like making money and having this big fancy network and all of these things. And now I'm just in a different stage of life where my priorities are different. And so I think realizing that it's okay that those things change is hard, but also a necessary thing that you have to do as you grow in your career and also in your personal life. And then, yeah, finding that balance, knowing that, okay, like Lady Livestock Company, for example, I loved it and it was super hard to let go, but we had that conversation of this is not serving us in this chapter. And also we cannot be the best ranchers that we can be because we've got all these other things going on. So for our sake and for the sake of the livestock, this chapter has to close, right? So again, a super emotional thing, but it's just a matter of being able to kind of be honest with yourself and saying, okay, this may not be the chapter that I wanted it to be. This may not look how I wanted it to look, but this is what's going to get me to the next stage that does look how I want it to look.
Yeah. If you were talking to 19-year-old Macey, would you recommend that she still go travel and make those connections, or what would you recommend to that 19-year-old Macey?
Yeah, honestly, 19-year-old Macey wouldn't listen to anybody. She knew what she wanted and she was going to get it one way or another. But I do think that at that time, that was exactly what I would have wanted for myself. 19-year-old Macey wanted it for her and I want it for her. But it, I think being able to travel and making all those connections while I could kind of sent me into this next area where I could, where I feel really confident in my career and I have the ability to freelance and I still get to work in agriculture while having my job kind of adjacent to agriculture and just staying connected in the industry, like the Trailblazer experience with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, things like that, where if I hadn't interned for National Cattlemen's, or if I hadn't gone to CattleCon every year in college, or if I hadn't done those things, I don't know if those opportunities would have come up later on. So I think I would tell her take advantage of all of those opportunities while you can, because someday life's going to get really busy and that's okay. But if, making those networks and making those connections, taking those opportunities, seeing the world, whatever that looks like, is important to you, then yeah, do it while you can.
For sure. Before we wrap up, I have one more question I want to ask, but Wyatt, do you have any questions you want to ask or bring up?
I don't know if your question's on the same topic, Lydia, but I really want to hear what brought you to your role today.
That's a good question. So I feel like I've said that about all of your all's questions, but you're doing a good job. So right out of college, I went to work for the Department of Agriculture here in Missouri. I was doing marketing for the Missouri Grown program, which is where we work with like small farmers and ranchers in our state to promote their product. I was there for 3 months, 2.5 maybe, when COVID happened. So much of that was traveling to these farmers and ranchers operations and being able to take pictures and advertise and all of those things. That stopped happening. So I, just a couple months later, got the call from Missouri Cattlemen's that said, hey, we have this position if you want it. And I did. And when I went to talk to my first boss, she was so supportive. And I've been so grateful. I've had nothing but incredible bosses my entire career. And she said, Macey, that job is perfect for you. You'd be silly not to take it. So I went and worked for them for just a couple years. And while I was with, one of my responsibilities at Missouri Cattlemen's was the chief editor of the Missouri Beef Cattleman magazine. And the company that prints it said, hey, you really seem like you'd be a good salesperson. So the individual that I worked with at Modern Litho was getting ready to retire, and we'd had a couple conversations, and I ended up going to work for Modern Litho. And now I'm kind of the ag girl in the office, so I get to print for lots of different breed associations and state cattlemen's groups and commodity organizations and stuff like that, which I love, because when I was on that side of things, I didn't know anything about print. I was a graphic designer, and I sent my stuff to the printer and they handled it. But now I feel like I really get to be an advocate or like a liaison for the folks in agriculture who maybe are in the same position, but obviously want to put out a really nice print project. So I'm very happy in my role now. I think I also get to work with a lot of Christian organizations, which, like, my whole thing has always been faith, family, agriculture. So I love that I get to work with individuals in different areas that I'm really passionate about. But my sister, she's 22 maybe now, and she actually came and worked with me at Modern Litho right out of college, and she wasn't there very long before her side business took off, and now she's an owner and operator of Kip's Cuts, which is an event floral design company. And so it's been so cool to see her take off. But she used to tease me because I felt weird about the fact that I'd been out of college for like 5 years and had 3 different careers already. And she said, Macey, you didn't apply for any of those jobs. So I say that not to boast by any means, because I was a little freaked out about how my resume looked, but that's what they mean when they say it's not what you know, it's who you know. And so having those connections can truly set you up for an entire career of people keeping an eye on you and waiting for you to be available or offering you jobs, whatever that process might look like. But it is because of the connections I made at the cattlemen's events and, the ag media summits and things like that I am in my career, both my full-time job and in my freelance business as well.
Yeah. Honestly, saying that you didn't have to apply for like a single one of those jobs, I think that's the end goal for all of us, like ag communicators, college students. We want to get to know everybody possible and not have to apply for a single job, because that process is stressful.
For sure. Which I will say, the first one, actually, now that I say that, the first one was a government job, right? The Department of Agriculture. So I did apply for that one. But every single person on the panel I had already worked with at some point because of an internship or, the Beef Queen interview, or because of my FFA state officer stuff or whatever it was. In some capacity, I had directly worked with every single person on that interviewing panel. So again, who you know makes a difference.
Yes, I will always preach that to people. I want to start wrapping things up, but first, I want to ask you some rapid fire questions. Just whatever answer pops up in your head first, just spit it out. Don't think about it too much. All right?
Okay, sounds good. I'm nervous. Let's go.
All right. What's your favorite state that you've ever been to?
Ooh, probably Montana.
Oh, that's a good one. I love Montana. What is your favorite commodity?
Cattle.
Yes, that's mine too. Mine too.
All about the cows.
Kind of branching off that, what's your favorite breed of cattle?
This isn't a very fast answer, but I was raised on a commercial cow-calf operation, and our whole thing was anything cheap that could raise a calf, right? So she's a good mama cow. It did not matter what color she was. And then Lady Livestock Company was Angus, and we were like partially registered and partially commercial. I honestly don't know that I have a favorite. I also work with a lot of the breed associations, so I don't know that I can say a favorite. But I love them all, truthfully.
Yeah. Personally, my favorite has got to be Simmental.
See, and I 100% like see the benefit of Simmental. There's just not a ton of them around here. But that's what I think is so cool regionally is how different like the breeds are represented. But then also like having Angus cattle specifically made me realize how many other breeds have things to contribute and like the importance of crossbreeding and all that stuff. But anyway, these are rapid fire and I'm talking too much.
I know, and now I just want to like go down the cattle rabbit hole, and I can't. But I'm going to speak a little bit about the region stuff because when I'm from North Carolina, and we have a lot of Angus, a lot of Simmental, and some Herefords, and then I moved down here to South Georgia. And when you get into Florida and like a little bit of South Georgia, there are Brahmas everywhere. And I was like, what is a Brahma? So that was really fun for me to see, like, just like moving south just a little bit, the difference of breeds of cattle. If you weren't working in agriculture, what career do you think you'd have chosen?
Oh my goodness. I feel like I would maybe still be writing or sales, which is again what I do now, but maybe in a different industry. But I love both of those a whole lot.
Most definitely. All right, this is my final question, and it's kind of a hard one, so I'll let you think on it a little bit. What's a communication skill that you wish you were better at?
Probably social media. And I know I didn't take a lot of time to think about that, but it's because I get a lot of like job listings for, freelance positions. And I feel like so many of them are social media or like SEO or web design or whatever. And I don't know anything about any of that. And social media, like I took classes on it in college, but it is not the same thing as when I was in college. So I think anything digitally because I feel pretty good about the print side of things, but like the digital stuff is so far over my head and I think changes so gosh darn fast that if you can like really stay up on it, I feel like you won't have any problems getting a job.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, especially with like web design, I could not design a website to save my life if somebody asked me to right now.
It's tough. I've tried the web design thing, but especially with like all the SEO and the optimization and I know we're the same thing, but like all of those buzzwords, that's like that's a whole new sector of communications for me.
Yeah, I can absolutely agree with that. I took a social media management class last fall, and our professor talked about how she constantly is updating what textbook the students have to go by because it's an ever evolving, resource that people use.
Yeah. Even honestly, just as a social media user, which like I'm 27 years old, but I feel so old when I talk about this stuff because like the whole being able to re-share something on Instagram like, to your own, when did that happen? Like how
right?
I feel like stuff is just evolving so gosh darn fast. I can't even keep up with how to use it, much less how to like leverage it as a marketing or communications tool. So props to the people who do that.
For sure. All right, I think that's all we have time to talk about today, but it was so great to get to chat with you, Macey. If you need to contact Macey, her information will be in the bio of this episode, so feel free to reach out to her. I'm sure she was open to any other questions or comments. That's all I have for right now. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you guys.
Thanks for tuning in to The Actual Story. Be sure to subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Until next time, keep telling agriculture's actual story.